Well, it's pretty late. I was looking at a lot of things, and I thought I would just go ahead and put a movie on. I ran into Transcendence, and it's kind of well, it's kind of important to understand because when I was watching Transcendence, it gets to that scene where everything's going high speed. He's going to help catch all the bad guys. He's going to catch all the bad guys. And just, clicks in my head again. I was remembering some of the different research I did. And it's just like, really interesting to think about, what's going to happen when you have all of these companies doing different things, but there's already a problem in some of these things. And some, I've talked a little bit about it before on X, basically, when I talk about mass models and certain stuff, because there's certain flaws the ways things are done. Because when I'm working with pure data, which is sorted data, and then you have different types of sorted data, it's really important to get the right kind of sorted data, because you have some people that they're on a different world market, and so they don't want certain things, like nobody had a copy of the Constitution of the United States literally in their AIs. I was just checking like that 2 months ago. Nobody still had a copy. Now me, I was putting a copy in my stuff, and there are different problems. You have to watch what you're doing with law, because nobody that's in sales wants somebody to tell them, oh, hey, maybe that's not a good approach. Maybe you shouldn't say that. How about you say this? They come up, and a lot of people I've heard have complained about stuff that way, because they just have issues about the way things are basically designed and tiered around. And, when people are building an AI for a world market, the idea of a world market is you want the mass appeal, basically for the most number of people. That's what you're basically looking to go ahead and get into, is because you want to be able to do that kind of stuff. So that means that you have this problem with supposed philosophies. And that's when you're getting into big problems, when you're getting into supposed philosophies, because now all of a sudden we have this situation that deals with all kinds of material that basically it's different, so to speak. Because when I'm sitting there trying to build a fleet, and I have a fleet of vehicles ready to go, and if these things end up on the freeway, a dozen of them, 1 million people a day is going to see it. It's just, there's no way that someone's not going to see it that way, So it's difficult to get into that territory to start talking about what the differences are between the construct of what I'm working with AIs, because you have these certain problems, basically where there's a difference between people in other places around the world that are socialist or communist versus people who are colonial constitutional capitalist. The Constitution of the United States is all about capitalism. And this is something that a lot of people just don't understand. Okay, I had to grab something here. Part of the problem is people don't understand weaponization of data. Today everybody knows that data is stolen. The weaponization of data actually started with the Royal German Empire. They decided that they were little guys. They didn't have a lot of land and they wanted to expand. So they decided to say, okay, well, let's take a completely different look as to what territories are. What is a territory? What is a field of interest? So this is where anything in business could become an exclusive territory. And they figured out the data part, and they figured out that they could work with pharmaceutical companies. So they partnered with pharmaceutical companies. Some of them are said to have been on board from the very beginning. The data suggests that, the fragments that we captured. And so basically, they're trading dope on universities and college campuses to basically people that are college professors. There was a substantial number of people. When you look at the various data, some of the data places that they believe that no less than 10% of college professors, university people, I'm not talking about students, I'm talking about teachers, were basically using things like cocaine and other drugs to just keep going or whatever. It's said that people do it today, that you got mathematicians and all kinds of people that will do it because they want to think. They want to increase the speed of their mind. To them, it's just a tool, so a lot of different ways to look at that. And, but, you get to these certain areas where there are problems. There are inherent problems because colonial constitutional capitalism, our Constitution, is set out to specifically make sure that people are loyal. So this is a problem, because you can't be loyal to the Constitution of the United States and then say, oh yeah, they're loyal to communism, they're loyal to socialism. It doesn't work that way, because communism and socialism are creations, basically, of the Royal German Empire. They created it. These are children, the children creations from a corporate standpoint. They're franchises. They created these organizations. And you have everybody trying to argue against it. Well, who's arguing against it? Oh, well, people in universities. Really? That's interesting. They're trying to claim that they're enlightened. They're really enlightened, and they're using a bunch of narcotics. And what else? And what else? What else are we talking about here? What is the actual reality here that we're dealing with? So basically, you have these people that are lying about things, and they're lying about the blood. They're lying about the huge, massive blood trail. It's just undeniable. The people who have died in connection to, if you trace everything to Royal German Empire, it all fits. It all fits together, and you end up with an elite class of people that were in it for the money, and they didn't care what they were doing. And with me, there's other family information that's been passed through the family that's tremendous. My grandmother, she passed information to me about things, about people in Europe. She showed me things. Ever since I was a small child, I got to see the postcards, the letters, and she would read them to me. And there were so many other things. And then she'd tell me things that her dad told her, her father told her. And, he died at a certain level. Her mom died when she was really young, too. But, basically, it's one of those situations where some inside information. And I remember things started out with Grandma telling me certain things when I was really young. And then they got, a little bit more real elaborate. She'd update them. And, it came through, like when my grandmother's father decided to leave Europe. He decided to leave Europe before World War I because he knew things. He had a vineyard, he had lands, he had apartments and houses. He had this wonderful vineyard, and up in the hill there was like a whole lot of gypsies, like 80 of them or so. And then there was other ones elsewhere that would travel back and forth. Maybe there would have been about 200 gypsies total. And the family in Europe would get mad at him. Why are you tolerating all these gypsies? He says, I'm not using that land. And he says they're just kind of going through life, so to speak. And anytime I need somebody to help, there are workers right there that are willing to work, you know. And then they go, well, yeah, but you spend so much time. You go up there and you take food and you take wine, and they're singing and they're dancing. And he says, well, actually, they're good dancers, you know. So he'd go up there and basically show up with things, and they would basically, talk and BS about stuff, and they would dance and sing, and they just, pretty much they were partying. They were like a party lifestyle, and he'd take wine up there and stuff, and I think he was enjoying himself. To him, it was like a form of theater in a way, because they would be practicing, doing all kinds of different stuff, and it was colorful. Anyhow, but there came a time when the information changed over the years, because I got more of an uptype. When you're smaller, you get a smaller amount of information, and it changes. And then it's like, oh, wait a minute, you didn't mention that part before. Oh, yeah, I didn't want to have to explain that part. And basically, there were people, she talked about they were listening on the radio to different people's speeches and this and that and what's going on. And, basically something had happened where people were meeting with him, and they went away and they left. And basically, there was this thing where basically by blood he was tied to the German-Austrian Empire. He was like 10th in line to the throne or something like that, 10th or 20th, whatever it was. He was 10th. So he was never going to, but he believed in republic. He believed in the concept of republics and for voting, and he believed in Stuarts and capitalism and all this stuff. So he was not, he was a minority viewpoint, actually. But so basically he was approached by certain people who felt that he was invisible because nobody tracks anybody beyond number 5, in a royal family. After that, everybody's faded away, and it's not a high priority anymore. You're not going to get in the limelight, but you can communicate with people, because people will basically communicate with you. So he was approached. And he was basically offered something, and that flipped him out. So as near as I could tell, to say certain things, I don't want to jeopardize certain things at this point, so I'm limited into what I could say, because different reasons. I would, like to be able to recover certain information. There's other information I already possessed, and I don't want it to be abused. It's been stolen. And but in a nutshell, basically, he was approached by the Royal German Empire, and they wanted him to be basically a syndicate member. This is the inside club of business people. They're business people. They're not per se like you would think of organized crime today, like American organized crime, Murder Incorporated. But which many places it's not Murder Incorporated. It's about gambling, but they're bookies, and people are, that's what it was. It was your local bookie, and then during, Prohibition, nobody had alcohol. They were bootleggers, So, notwithstanding that there wasn't some crazy players out there, I just don't want to go there. But he gathered the family together immediately and says, "Hey, look, we all have to leave to go to America. We have to do that. We have to leave." And they were like, Why? He says, you don't understand, didn't you hear this speech and this other speech? Well, yeah, we got to, and the things that are going to happen. There's going to probably be some jobs. He says, no, there's going to be war. He says, you don't know who these people are. You have no idea what these people are getting ready to do. And they're like, what are you talking about? He says, let me explain this to you. These people are getting ready to melt the church bells down. They're going to start going to the churches, and they're going to make deals and they're going to get the bells. He says, they're going to steal the bells. He says, no, they won't steal them. They'll offer them something really generous or something in swap, but they're going to get all the metal. They're going to melt the church bells down for bullets. And you people aren't going to believe this stuff. And these people are going to rain darkness all over Europe, everywhere. And they're like, well, maybe we could go to Russia. And he says, no. He says, no. He says, going to Russia too. He says, you don't understand. You have no idea who these people are and what they're getting ready to do. We have to go to America. He says, America is the place to be. And he begged him for like 3 days, and they wouldn't do it. And he says, well, I'm leaving. I have to go. And they just didn't understand what was going on. So he left, basically, Austria with his wife and his first daughter. And my grandmother was born here. She was born later in the United States. And so it was an interesting thing. And she would tell me there would be all this family communications, and they would keep, the family in Europe would keep asking for money, over the years. And it was just all this long history. I missed all this stuff that happened. And she talked about, she says, well, after World War I, my dad took me back, and we went back. And we got to visit family members. And then all of a sudden, they were having dinner, and somebody turns up the radio, and Adolf Hitler was giving a speech, and he was running for office. And he's saying all these different things, and he was listening to things, and all of a sudden he turned around and says, we have to prepare. He says, we're going to be leaving immediately. And they go, what? He says, you don't understand. They're going to do it again. He says, they're going to do it again, and it's going to be worse. It's going to be worse. They've learned more things. They've learned more things from everything from before, and it's going to be worse. It's going to be worse. And he couldn't get the family to really understand what it is that he was talking about. And he basically couldn't convey to them what he knew, how he knew it, the way his brain worked. And because a lot of them, they thought they were enlightened and all these other different things. And so he leaves. They leave, and there were some different things she talked about that happened there, and a lot of things that were a lot of fun, and a lot of beautiful land, and all this other stuff. So, they left again. They left because Hitler was coming in, and then there was all these letters of Hitler rising to power, things that were happening, the Germans running out, and then they were begging for money, and they were begging for guns, and he was sending them money, and he sent them like $90,000, and that was like back, way back. You're talking 30s money, $90,000. And, and the thing is he was mad because he says anybody doesn't need, so I'll pay for the whole family to go to America. And if you don't have any money, he says, I'll give you $500. That's enough money to get into a house in America. And when you're talking turn of the century, 1900s, you could buy a house for $500, at that time. So at least get yourself into a house that way. So, lever your way. But they didn't want that. So he finally got pissed off. Says, okay, I'm going to give you one more thing. They're begging for guns. And he sent them, Graham was telling them the letter, I think it was $34,000. $34,000. The Germans had invaded into the area. And I think he went down and bought a bunch of guns. I think he went and bought a bunch of Thompson machine guns. Sent them $34,000 total, some money for them, and some Thompson machine guns and ammunition, and sent them to Europe. And they were like, you should come and fight and all this. He says, you don't understand. He says, there's too many factions. He says, there's 7 factions. Grandma would tell it to me. He says, there were 7 factions. He says, I'm in the smallest faction. The smallest faction. I believe in republic, and I believe in democracy, and I believe that people should have the right to vote and be stewards. And, he says, I'm in the minority. He says, we wouldn't last long. He says, they'll all stab each other in the back. They'll all kill each other. Says, I don't want to see it. It doesn't make any sense. Just get out of the way. I've taken the deeds for the land. He told me, he says, yeah, he told them straight out. They were arguing for a little bit. He says, I'm taking the deeds for all the land, and I'm taking them to America. And they're on Ellis Island records. One time I was looking through it. Box of deeds. So this is something where, basically he would be looked upon as a steward. They would welcomed him in the country as an arriving steward, basically, because he has a box full of land deeds. So anyhow, but and I think there was, I believe there was some other material that he shared with the U.S. government, and sometime I'll talk about that more, about what that was, and explain it, and because I only understand it from fragments of certain things, so but of the stories and the meanings of how people were, a lot of it all got put together. And so I bring these things out because people don't understand about puppeting. You used to have, my grandmother used to talk about people are being puppeted by this and they're being puppeted by that, and this, and the Russians are horrible puppeters, and this and that, and the Bolsheviks and all this other stuff. All these things she learned from the different letters from different people, families and friends from Europe, and things that were in the newspaper, horrible things, horrible photos, genocide. You had Joseph Stalin committing all those genocides, tens of millions of people, just horrible, and people don't understand that. So in many ways, we have this great weird truth, and the truth is that some people's position is that I believe that the statement with my grandmother's father was, he responded, they were talking about enlightenment. He says, there is no enlightenment. He says, there is only lies and blood. There's no enlightenment. There's only lies and blood. And that is a very powerful statement to think about how stuff like that happens. And when you end up having an entire continent, more than an entire, multiple continents getting into world wars, and you have so many people that are lost in deceptions. And here in our election, we're seeing this right now. We're seeing people that are thinking that somehow socialists are okay, and that they're wonderful, and they think communists are okay, and this is insanity. This is madness. These do not mix. You can't swear an oath to the Constitution of the United States. You can't swear an oath to step up with the other stewards and get involved in steward voting if you have no intention of being a steward. This is part of the problem. Communism and socialism are not compatible with colonial constitutional capitalism. So the Constitution is a contract that validates other contracts, by the way, and a lot of people don't even know what those are. A lot of gap in that, because stewards never gave anything up. So the endorsement, we decided to build an extra militia, federal militia. Let's get a permanent professional militia. But we're not sacrificing the ones we have. They keep running. Make a list. We have new members. Here, go see a congressman. Yes, we have some new members. Would you please help facilitate these people by giving them firearms? These are on all the old records, and people, you can look them up. People don't understand. So this is why you have all these weird problems where you have these people making strange gun laws, doing all these strange things that are not compatible. They're working with data, thinking or saying falsely that somehow they are working good governance, and they're adding all these different regulations and permit costs and all this other stuff. And they learn this in college, but where this comes from in college and university, it's tainted information that was designed and engineered by the Royal German Empire. You see, it's contrary to the Constitution, to our original colonial constitutional capitalism. Because we had these things where some people didn't understand. The British would appraise somebody who made a piece of property, new assets, and they would take those books and they'd take them overseas and they'd put it in that, and their treasury would look, oh, here's a new appraisal. Oh, that's a new hard asset. Oh, well, let's do a balance print. Well, it's justification to print currency. And so we decided to say, we're going to make our own treasury and cut them out. And people says, you can't do that. They're going to kill you. And he says, well, yeah, you can see we're risking a lot. How many of the rest of you are in? That's the American Revolution. So elections are supposed to be about the competition to see who has the best economic plan, the best national defense plan. It's all national security arguments and economic arguments. And, you can add some other things in there too, but you have these people that are misunderstanding the Constitution and they're abusing. There are areas where there's a difference between tolerance, that's stated as tolerance, versus policies, when you have people that want to be diabolically opposed. And see, there are those of us who have the right to not be victimized by people who are diabolically opposing something, so to speak, that is basically, it's diabolically against the Constitution of the United States. So they're always violating our rights. So we have to stop that, because all it does is sabotage. That's mass economic sabotage. That's demographic warfare. And it was all designed by the Royal German Empire. All that stuff goes back. And if you go look at it, in World War II, jump back to World War II, you had the Nazis running around going, or code enforcement. And they ran around every place they went. So they were code enforcement. And they say, oh, well, it's been decided you have to pay permits on this. They go up to people who had families, and they say, okay, it's been decided that you're going to have to pay $300 in taxes on your wagons and your carts that you have here on your farm. And they're like, we can't possibly do that. We only have a $600 a year income, and we have to pay for all of our clothes and everything. We can't possibly pay that. And they said, well, it is what it is. If you don't pay it, or else we'll be seizing stuff. And you think that for one moment that somehow we're inventing something that's new. No, these people are pulling out a roadmap practically verbatim, of what you saw the Nazis do. Where did the Nazis get it? Yeah, where did that information? That information came from the Royal German Empire Spy Department and their schools and the engineering of these things. They were used before. All of these tactics were in books. They were in these books for occupation, for basically taking over different areas. And these were not Sun Tzu necessarily. These things were Royal German Empire. So you had Stalin running around with Royal German Empire occupation management books, setting up new government books and running government. And running socialist and communist governments are different than running a capitalist government and running a republic. Completely different. Because our republic is supposed to be a combination of East Indies Company. It's supposed to be it's supposed to be guaranteed to help us. We're supposed to always have access to the treasury to develop real estate and lands. We paid for the lands. We paid for all the lands. I don't know if someone caught that in one. I hope they caught it in one of my other lectures there. We paid for all the land. The government had no money. We paid for it. The deal is we're supposed to get stock and a whole bunch of other things, residuals, dividends, a whole bunch of stuff. Didn't exactly happen right. The government's not supposed to take residuals. We are. The government didn't have any money. We paid for everything. We're the stockholders. We're the stewards. There's something wrong with the governance. See, there's supposed to be separate governance voting for things, and other stuff didn't manifest quite right. And some of it used to exist, and they kind of faded away with some of it. They left it. But then again, there were other problems. But now we have these people that think that they can believe anything and just be communist and socialist and implement and overthrow the government. And they're committing treason. We literally have parties committing treason. We don't have a real election. I have billions of dollars in damage done to my mobile archive vehicles. Billions and billions. Due to the state. Long time dealing with these people who are liars. They make demographic lists and they attack people. They invent permits and these items as lies, and they attack people. They're demographic weapons. And these all come from the Royal German Empire. From communism, from socialism. They evolved them more. But the root origin of all of this, see, these people come in, they want you to do a whole lot more, but they want you to just suck Karl Marx right into your head, and doesn't work for me. No, that ain't going to work, and it's kind of obvious to see some of these. So a lot of people say it's pretty obvious to see these people walking around with Marx in their head, and it's getting really old because you can't do this. And here's where we come to the big thing about the weaponization of data and AI. You see, some AI companies used vast amounts of data, and they're trying to use prompts to re-engineer and control the wave sets, the logic sets. The problem is that people like me were working with clean data to begin with, painstakingly sorting it, making sure that everything was going to be constitutionally aligned. So having a constitutional aligned AI is exactly what you want. But if you have that, guess what? Then nobody wants to use your product in all of these countries around the world that are socialist or communist. It doesn't work for them. So there's a problem. I think that, I've laid it out on the table. That's part of the big problem right there. So you get into some of these other items that are far more important. With AI, the type of AIs that I'm building, I could point them at something and say, I want you to go through all their paperwork and see what it's going to do. This is what I had in the archive. This is what I was building. And it would identify everything these people were doing as crimes. It would see right through immediately. Evaluate, say, wait a minute, what are they saying here? What's the mindset here? Oh, that's not Constitution. That fits into this logic set. That's not only not Constitution, that's treason. That's treason. So my research had a value of purity respective to the Constitution of the United States. So as we have these people that are trying to claim that they can be socialist and communist, they're not compatible because they're criminals. They're criminals. See, they think, well, we'll just go uptown and jack these people. That's the solution. And it's like, you're not going to try to come up with a stimulus deal? Excuse me? So what they're going to do is, instead of stimulating the economy, they're going to sabotage the economy. You don't enhance the economy when you run around and you start choking people financially to death. You can't do that. And not only that, they're promoting all of these other problems, all this crime. It's horrible. And you get to see all this fraud and all this other stuff. We have genocide going on. We have people dying in the streets. We have genocide going on. So this is something where, guys like me have something in the works where it does things. In other words, what I see is going to happen 500 times faster, than 5,000 times faster, than 10,000 times faster. Just going to go snap, 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 and go through stuff so fast that it's mind-boggling. I'll show you some of the new stuff that's coming out in where you have AIs that are just flash, boom, flash, 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 using a model that fast. It's just incredible what has happened literally in the last 5 years. And I want to go to a quick part two, because I need to explain to people what's happening with numbers. It's crucially impossible to continue the way we're going right now. We have to deal with this. So, okay, I'm back. So I'm going to get into the part two a little bit here. Unfortunately, I don't have what I'm looking for. It's on a different drive. Okay. This information here deals with explaining as succinct as we can that basically 300 million people are dead on planet Earth because of the Royal German Empire, because of their creations. We fought 2 great wars. They are responsible for the Russian Revolution. They are responsible for it. And this is something that people don't understand. They're responsible for all of these horrible things. Because here you have Germany funding Lenin in the revolution. And it's kind of sad because some people run AIs in different countries and whatnot. They don't want to talk about certain things certain ways. They want to edit it out. They don't want to tell the truth about it. They don't want to tell you that all this gold was basically transferred and it was the Royal German Empire that funds Lenin. And Lenin in turn, and there's all this data that they weaponized to basically run around having all that insider information as to how to sort people. So you have blood again, all this massive amount of people that Stalin is sorting out and murdering. Just murdering in huge rows and rows and rows and rows. And then all of a sudden we end up getting to World War II Germany. And what happens? Mass genocide again. So this is something about truth. So what is happening here is a device. It's a big device and a mechanism. That is what a corporation is.